Well, as Elena mentioned today, we are going to be talking a little bit about heuristics. And we call it heuristics for morals because we want to make it more understandable. Sometimes the heuristics is something a little bit difficult to digest, so we wanted to put it in a more human words. Well, that's Maia, that's me. I think that Elena already introduced us. Maia, do you want to say something to the audience before we get started about ourselves?
Always the same mistake, I mute. I think Elena did it perfect. A perfect introduction of ourselves, and yes, I'm always mute. So that's the real Maia.
That's something that happened to us while we are working in every single meeting. In every single meeting, we are saying like, "Hey, Mai, you are muted," and she was like talking for maybe 5 minutes without realizing that. Okay, so we will get started. So today we will talk a little bit about what a heuristic review is. That might be like a complicated word, but you probably heard or known about that term. We will learn how to conduct a heuristic review on designs and also train our eyes on how to identify those things quicker and faster. We will have exercises, a couple of quizzes, and some examples to share. So if you have any questions at any point, please drop them on the chat. We will be monitoring them as we speak. So we will get started with the introduction, of course.
Yes, let's start. Oh, I stopped seeing the screen.
Yeah, Micho, give me 1 second. You know when you are presenting and something, PowerPoint just crashed. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
There we go. Sorry. When you're practicing at home, everything works okay. And when you're on a live presentation, things happen. There we go.
So yeah, let's first talk about the visible part of the problem, which is the UI, user interface, screen, graphic user interface. The thing is, they are everywhere. They grow, they multiply, and we have today apps, websites, tablets, phones, watches, and behind each, there's a UI, and behind the UI, there's a developer or a team. And there are many places where one can create a mess. And since early days, developers had to deal with concepts that can create problems, are beyond algorithms and logic, like buttons, menus, interactions, graphics. There's a lot of responsibility in a single UI on how we communicate with people. So there are many places where we can create a mess. And as a result, applications are remarkably good in that aspects. We know it. We'll see now a gallery of examples of how bad it can be when engineers don't know about UI concepts. There's a fun fact, 5 years ago, there were 27 developers per designer. So let's start with the gallery, and believe we haven't created the following example, it exists. Yes, your eyes will cry, as my eyes are crying. And I mean, no words to say about this, this exists. Let's look at the next one. This is, if you are developing use Git, that's a classic application in Windows to configure. This exists, it's real. Someone believes it's useful to put all the fields together. And another example, we can see an application for renaming files, and we can continue showing examples for hours, for days, for weeks. But what's the problem here? Is this something new? There was one engineer, in fact, many engineers in the 80s, and I'm talking about the 80s, no cell phones, no internet, nothing, no Instagram, were in times where usability testing was luxury, they came out with methods to evaluate with less money, like cheaper methods. Tati, can you, yeah. So the man you see in the picture, Jakob Nielsen, you may have known him from the Nielsen Norman group, the blog of Nielsen Norman, the videos of Nielsen Norman. He coined the term discount usability engineering, which means how can I evaluate interfaces with less money and doing that before they are even coded. So they developed this method we are talking about, the heuristic evaluation, like 30 years ago. I know it was quite old. If you have the chance to read classic books, we strongly recommend the one in the middle, Usability Engineering. You will see a very classic piece.
Okay, so now we'll jump into to talk a little bit about what are the heuristics and what a better person than Jakob Nielsen himself to present what the heuristics are.
Heuristic evaluation is a method for finding usability flaws in a design by judging it relative to known principles for what makes user interfaces easy to use. The 10 most fundamental of these principles are called the usability heuristics, which is how the method got its name. Now, heuristic means rule of thumb, so basically a very broad design guideline that applies to a wide range of user interfaces, though not necessarily every single time. There are exceptions, but very few of them. And you should not bet that your design is one of those few exceptions. And I would definitely recommend that you do a lot of user testing if you think about launching a product that violates any of the top 10 usability heuristics.
Did the audio sounded okay? Were you able to hear what Jakob just said?
Yeah,
Yes.
it sounded good.
Awesome, perfect. So just to summarize what he just said, the heuristic evaluation is an inspection method where we judge our UI with known principles. And these principles are what we call heuristics. And now we will start digging a little bit deeper into those 10 usability heuristics for user interface design. The first Jakob Nielsen 10 heuristics is visibility of system status. And this relates to so much more than the user interface design. At its essence, it's about communication and transparency, which are critical to many aspects of our life. If you take a few moments to look around, you will know there are a lot of systems around you and how they are communicating the status to you. Your phone or your laptop will be displaying how much battery life remains. Your email application will let you know how many unread emails you have, and that's pretty bothering for me to have unread emails. But a sign in the subway will be indicating you what's the next stop. And all these nuggets of information will allow you to accurately assess the current state of a system you're interacting with. And that's what visibility of system status means. We all do online shopping, right? Or at least we became experts during quarantine. At least in Argentina, we are not used to doing online shopping as you all from the US do, but we became really fans of using online shopping. And does it bother you when you are buying something online and you don't know when the package will arrive, or even if the order has been shipped at all? And that's why it's really important for us to have visibility of system status. On the Amazon example we are seeing, we have a clear visual way of displaying each step of the purchase process. When did I make the order? When is the product shipped? And when is supposed to arrive to my house? So where can we apply the visibility of system status? If you have a tracking system, be sure to indicate which step of the workflow you're in, what's upcoming, and what has been already completed. If the process is too long, inform the users the progress and remaining time when loading content, saving changes, or even processing the data. So you are not worried that something gets stuck in the middle. The heuristic number 2, it's match between the system and the real world. But what does this actually mean, right? In simple words, we need to avoid jargon and technical terms and speak the user's language with words, phrases, and concepts that are familiar to the user. The analogy that we have right now on the screen, it's a real word, is how in a real world a credit card would look like. And it will be useful for the users that are not used to working with this type of technology to know where, for example, the security code on your card is and where you should put it on the screen. With this type of analogies, if we can leverage those and put those on our applications, the user won't have any type of confusions. And where does this heuristic will apply? Well, basically, it applies everywhere, from content in your user interface to icons and to call to action buttons. The use of metaphors is something essential. Like if we are doing a shopping cart, the shopping cart icon on most websites would look like exactly the shopping cart in real life. The desktop on our computers, doesn't it look like to our real desktop? Or even the trash can or the drag and drop actions. Number 3, it's all about the user control and freedom. Users might make mistakes on websites or applications, and they will need that emergency exit to leave that unwanted state without having to go through an extended dialogue. That might sound really complicated, so we are going to jump into a couple of examples to explain that better. Imagine that you're reading an email, right? And we are all working from home. I don't know, I have a dog, Bailey, and when he was a puppy, he was walking everywhere. And any time and then he would walk into my computer. Imagine what would happen if he would delete an email, an important work email. Be a mess, right? But luckily, applications like Gmail have the undo action. You can see there on the yellow part, that's the ability for us to undo the action, the unwanted action we just occurred. And that's just giving the user control and freedom over their actions with just one click. Another example is a return arrow or button that we have on so many applications. In this particular example, Microsoft Word allows you to even choose to which step you would like to go back to. And that's amazing. Not every application allows you to do that. And that will give you full control on your actions. So when the user is able to go back or redo an action, it will give them the sense of freedom. Be sure that you are not relying on the web browsers such as Internet Explorer or Chrome, the go back option on those web browsers, and provide the undo action within the application. Also, allow the users to sign out and finish any process at any given time. Do we have any questions so far on the chat? I haven't been reading the chat. I will take a look if Bailey would never.
We are good.
We are good. We don't have any questions. Okay.
We have exercises then, so be prepared.
Okay. Cool. But if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to interact me. This is an informal conversation between you all, so we are happy to answer any questions or doubts if there's an example that is way too complex. Okay, heuristic number 4, consistency and standards. This heuristic will ensure that your application is predictable and learnable. Users should not have to be guessing what different words, situations, or action mean within your applications. We can think about consistency in 2 different ways, external and internal. The Office package is the perfect example for internal consistency. Doesn't all the 3 examples look really similar to each other? We do have some central things that are the same for all the Office packages, and you can see them highlighted in yellow. And then we have some other things that are custom to each app because it makes sense, right? I don't want to do the same actions on Excel or on PowerPoint or even on Microsoft Word, so it makes sense to have different things, but some central alignment. And that's exactly what we call internal consistency. External consistency, on the other hand, refers to maintaining consistency outside the products. There might be unestablished conventions for UIs in the industry, or even for UIs in general. I will give you an example, the one that you are all seeing on the screen right now. Most e-commerce sites has a shopping cart feature. Users are familiar with that feature because every time they open an e-commerce site, they have expectations on how that feature should work and where it should be located on the site. Probably you know this, but most of the shopping carts in e-commerce sites are on the right top corner. And that's not coincidence, that's external consistency. Nielsen states that people will spend more time on other sites rather than yours. So if those sites are following a convention and your site is breaking that convention, you are forcing people to learn something new. An example for us to have more consistency, it's the design systems. We have Bootstrap, you may have heard of Angular materials. Those are just some examples that will help you maintain external consistency within your products. Error prevention, it's the heuristic number 5. And this is about preventing a problem from occurring in the first place, either by eliminating an error-prone condition or presenting the users a confirmation option before they commit to the action. How annoying is to write down a password and then after clicking next, the system tells us the password doesn't meet the right criteria. In my personal case, I really hate when that happens. A good design will prevent me from clicking. The password doesn't meet the security criteria, or even if the username I choose is already taken. If we don't have error prevention on this type of forms, the user might feel frustrated and not even create the account at all. So we need to prevent these things from happening in the first place. Google has the perfect error prevention example, and I will let you know. It will let you know before clicking on the next button if there's something wrong with either your username or your account, as you can see on the screen right now. And in this example, this is really important. This is something we should consider every time we are designing an application. We need to be sure, or that we need to ask the user, are you really sure that you want to delete this account? How many times did it happen that we all have phones, cell phones probably, and most of them are touch. And it's really common for us to drop our phone on our purse, in our pocket, and touch something by mistake. Like my dad keeps calling me like 5 times per day because he doesn't lock his phone. So imagine the things that could happen to him. So what will happen if we don't have this intermediate step asking us, are you really sure you want to delete your account? If we don't have that, the user might lose everything. So we need to be really careful about adding these intermediate steps. Finally, the error prevention heuristics will apply to forms where we need to validate data from the user, such as passwords or usernames. And also when we are talking about permanent actions by adding a confirmation step before any permanent action like a delete account. So I will stop here. I already talked a lot about the first 5 Nielsen heuristics. So we're gonna jump into a little bit quiz. I would like if you all can just guess what would the answer be of this question, which heuristic applies to this example. And we have 4 different options: boarding pass heuristic, consistency and standards, visibility of system status, and match between system and real world. Think this through. I will give you a couple of minutes to think, and I would like if you all can answer via the chat. Maybe since there's a plane. Okay. B, C. Do you all want to see the answer?
I don't.
You don't? You're mean. You want to keep everybody guessing?
C is the
Hey,
most frequent.
joking. Okay. I will. Yes, number C is the correct one. Visibility of system status. And why most of you that said C? Is there more than? We have several quizzes today, and a couple of them might have more than one answer correct. Maia, do you want to explain a little bit further?
Yeah, I mean, we in some perspective, we can think this is much of system and real world because we are indicating, we can tend to think that, but we have no indication, we don't have like a map, or we just have an icon of a plane, so it's not enough to say there's a match. And the other answer, consistency and standards, yes, I mean, we can say it's a consistent boarding pass to all the boarding passes we can say, so B can be. A, definitely not, because there's no boarding pass heuristic, but we can create it in the future.
Okay. And we have a second quiz. The system should speak the user's language with words, phrases, and concepts familiar to the user rather than system-oriented terms. Which one of the four options is? Error prevention, consistency and standards, speak my language, or match between system and real world? D, D, C, D, D, C, C, D. Okay. Okay, we are seeing a couple of people saying C and some others saying D.
I want to look the answer. CD or Pro?
D. C is the explanation of D. Did I make it too difficult?
Answer, answer, answer.
Okay, it's number D. Why? Because number C, it's not a heuristic. I mean, speak my language was kind of an irony that would be much between the system and the real world. But yes, number D is the correct one. Okay,
Exactly.
and now I will
pay attention.
Yes, we have a good audience. Okay, so I will give it to Maia to continue talking about the other 5 heuristics.
Fantastic. Thanks for staying with us. We have 6 to 10 heuristic left. This one is my favorite, recognition rather than recall. A very complicated way of saying, don't make me think my brain is lazy. What's the principle behind to minimize the memory load, making things visible, avoiding to remember information from one part to another, IDs, codes, everything should be visible, easy retrievable when appropriate. Let's see some examples. Everyday examples when people apply this. If we search in Amazon, we'll see a list of recommendations as we type, even before we finish. In this case, if we pick one of the recommendations here, we are doing recognition. We are recognizing what we want to find. In this case, can be a microphone for Xbox One, I don't know, rather than recalling, trying to type what I have in my brain. Next. Again, we don't have any agreement with Amazon. In In this case, when we pick an address, we are recognizing an address rather than recalling it. Instead of writing an address, we are picking one. And probably an extreme example, a very popular example, is the next one, Netflix. Companies like Netflix are making a huge profit by exploring this principle. Like, we don't look for content. Content comes to us. We just recognize and select our options. And many times we can browse for hours, like Netflix knows us, maybe more than I want them to know me. So how can we apply this principle? Well, when you are doing a UI or a form, try to use type ahead. Before users type, include clues. Whenever you can, autocomplete the fields you know. Give that possibility. The less you make people think, the better. We don't want to grade down people. We just want to make them more efficient. For thinking, well, we have other activities, not our UI. And last but not least, evaluate customized content. Yes, recommender systems are something very popular, Netflix, Spotify, whatever. However, beware of the side effects of storing users' information in data privacy and amplification of biases. That can be an entire talk, but we'll leave here. Next one. 7th heuristic, flexibility and efficiency of use. Okay. Which is a nice way of saying, give me shortcuts. Let's see how this applies. It means allow users to tailor frequent actions, use accelerators.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic. Let's look at some examples. One example of making application flexible is to allow shortcuts, allow icons, allow direct accesses to the places we want to use. We can see this applied, for example, in Instagram and Spotify. Oh, I see we lost Tati. Okay,
I'm sorry.
here we are back.
I'm back. Can you hear me? You all see my screen?
Yes.
Yep, we got it.
Cool. Sorry. Okay.
Back to normality. So, as I was saying, a way is to have shortcuts. Another example is, for example, move to the next one. For example, in case of Instagram, we can have duplicated actions. We can tap, or we can tap the heart, and it does exactly the same. And that's not redundancy. That's allowing different type of users have the same action. And yeah, for sure, mobile dashboards where you can control everything in place. That's not duplication, that's not redundancy. Again, that's that's scattering for different users. So to wrap up, this principle applies to shortcuts, to advanced settings, to customize use. Let's move now to the 8th heuristic, aesthetic and minimalist design. Again, a way of saying less is more. But what is minimalism about? It's about reducing everything, leaving just an icon with a ball, with nothing. No. It means don't have in the screen information we don't need. Every extra unit of information means overload, means having people to think more. How can we assess this heuristic? Let's look at this example. We have Walmart old design versus Walmart new design. Maybe they have another design now, we don't know, but the thing is, we can buy a headset in both, but the second one has less distractions, has less information that can prevent us from distracting and clicking, I don't want to buy, which is very bad for Walmart. So recommendations for applying this principle, and this is kind of key. Only display relevant data. What is relevant data? The data we need to complete the task. We can use as an inspiration the navigation systems. We know if you have a lot of distractions while we drive, we can have an accident. It's not that serious in applications we have today, but whenever you want to add something in the form, think twice. Do I need this? Can we remove it? Again, focus on the task. You shouldn't have distractive elements. There are like things like flashy icons where you know, just think twice in the task you are trying to accomplish. And 9, heuristic. We are 2 to go. Help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. Error messages should be expressed in plain language, no codes, indicate the problem precisely and constructively suggest a solution, as Nielsen has said. What is this meaning? I see a lot of error messages every day, like 3, 4. All the error messages we see here in this example has something in common. It's not they are negative, it's not they are horrible, it's they are useless. Let's say I see one of these errors when I operate in the system, like the operation completes successfully and it's not an error, or lab view, generic error, the file could not be loaded. What do I do? Like, do I crash my computer? Do I throw it to the trash bin? I don't know. How can we write usable messages besides writing oops? What's the right guideline? Let's see one example of a good guideline. Next. So yes, the waters are divided. I see there are a lot of Windows lovers and haters. I have to admit this is a pretty decent job of an error message. We can see the sections. For example, we have the details with no jargon or very few jargon. We have a progress. We know Windows is doing something. We don't know what, but something is moving. And we have a link to share with the technician and a QR code and probably a code, but the code is not, it's just at the bottom of the screen. It's not we say like stop code, critical process died. No, we just see a face first. Probably this error message took 6 months of development at Microsoft headquarters. But the core is this error tells you how to continue. Recommendations for writing errors or when dealing with developers writing errors, be informative. We always think in the happy path. We never think our UI will fail. We never think PowerPoint will crash. So try to be informative, plan this from the very beginning and avoid any jargon you can use. You know, it's the hardest part, but it's important for the error. But most important, ensure continuation of work. Your flight is canceled, provide a number to call, because that's the frustration when you see a problem and you don't know how to continue. By just saying, send an email or whatever, you keep users calm. And again, be short and concise when possible. And please, again, if you can send questions in the chat at any time, but we got to the last heuristic, help and documentation. But wait a minute, you told me to be usable before. How comes this guy Nielsen said include help and documentation isn't counterintuitive. So yes, as we see before, PowerPoint can crash, shit happens. So even though it is better if the system can be used without documentation, as Nielsen said, it may be necessary to provide help and documentation. Let's see some examples of help. And e-commerce, a classic example of help. We have many steps that can fail: the delivery, the payment, the ordering, and they are grouped by category. Whenever we plan a help, we need to think in the odd scenarios. As I mentioned before, we always think in the positive way, but sometimes for usability, we need to think the other way around. Just go to the negative side. Another way, adding inline help, that's another valid technique. And yeah, final recommendations to wrap up all this enormous amount of information we gave. Yes, in addition to good design, include some documentations, include frequent questions, that's sometimes useful, and always focus on the tasks, focus in the points where your users could fail, not just help on the happy path, just because that will cover when problems happen. And that's all about heuristics. Let's
wait. We have something more before we wrap up.
Yeah,
Don't forget the quiz.
exercises. We have exercises. Which heuristic applies to Google example?
B, most of you all saying B. D, okay. B is aesthetics and minimalism design, and D is flexibility and efficiency of use. Okay, should we say the answer, Maia?
Sure, go.
You are saying you're feeling lucky?
I'm feeling lucky.
B.
Yeah, go.
Go, cool.
I'm curious.
Yes.
B and D, and why? Yes, we only see the information we need. And for those who indicated D, I'm curious to know the flexibility of use, but having a microphone for voice input, that's flexibility and efficiency of use. It was that D was hard. Those who indicated D, that was a hard one. Let's move to the next exercise. Which is the heuristic represented? Even though it is better if the system can be used without documentation, it may be necessary to provide help. D.
Okay. D is help and documentation. We have 404, we have consistency and standards, and we also have error prevention.
Let's look at the answer.
Yes.
Help and documentation. You are a fantastic audience.
You are paying attention. Thank you. Okay. So we talk about the Nielsen's 10 heuristic, but this set of heuristics that we share, we share that one because it's the golden standard, the gold standard to begin with. If you never heard about heuristics, we will recommend for you to start with the Nielsen's one. However, there are many others that you can use, or even you can build your own set of heuristics with your team. As I mentioned, the Nielsen heuristics are the most used and the generic ones. And the other ones we have here on the screen are based on these ones. So once we share the presentation, I think that Mary will be sharing the presentation tomorrow. You will have the links for everything to access later. Continue. So we talk a lot about heuristics, right? We covered them all. Now we will start talking like how can we actually apply those heuristics, right? It sounds really nice in theory, but how we can use them. And for using the heuristics, there are a few steps involved, and we call them heuristic evaluation, and that would be the method we will be explaining and working with today. There are a few steps involved, starting from recruiting the evaluation team, aligning on the methodology, performing the evaluation, debriefing the findings, and sharing the report with the client. And the amount of steps might sound scary, but that's not the case at all. This method should be brief. It should not take more than a week to execute. And with time, if you start conducting heuristic evaluations, it will end up coming naturally. You would even remember the amount of steps you need to conduct in order to execute this successfully. And in the next couple of slides, we will go a little bit deeper on each of those steps. Let's talk about the first action. Find your evaluation team. While you can always do this on your own, it's always better to recruit more evaluators to uncover more problems and avoid those false positives. With 3 to 5 evaluators, you can find about 70% of the problems. They ideally should have experience in usability, but however, if that's not the case, you cannot get any evaluators with experience, you can include analysts or other team members. So be sure that instead of maybe 5, think about having 6 or 7 people joining your heuristic evaluation as an evaluator. And how do we prepare for the session? We will have a briefing meeting where we will share the scope and the material to be evaluated, and together with some templates. Those templates will help the evaluators report issues in a uniform way, as we can see in the example that we have on the left. The idea is to have the uniform way of reporting the problem. And this is just an example that we use with Maia when we work. It's just a way of putting all the findings together in a place that would make sense, and we don't invest that much time in making something aligning on how to present those findings. Mai, do you want to talk about performing the evaluation?
Yes. So once we have the team, once we have the alignment, the idea is that each of the evaluators will do the review at their time. It is not we are together in a room and try to do. Yes, there are variants that they all do together, but the classic way is to do it separately and then aggregate the data. The most important thing here is how can we report the problem? So we will try not to be subjective, because we'll see a problem and we really need to see, well, this is a problem. One way to work on that subjectivity is to have a track on what is the problem that happened, what is the impact, and what are the recommendations. That way it'll be easier to do the reporting. And you might have said there's a severity scoring somewhere in the place. What's severity scoring? Well, the method originally states you have to add severity scoring. And Nielsen has like a scale which goes from critical to where there's not an issue. The problem is with the severity is we are dealing with subjective information. And whenever we put a score, it's what we think. The suggestions for the scoring, if you want to be very objective are use a very short scale, something like we'll use 3 scores. We have a proposal on the left, Molich and Soro-Lewis scales are kind of simple if you want to score. For example, Molich says like minor is something that delays the user briefly. For serious, it delays significantly but allows to complete the task. And probably catastrophic, you may not use the word catastrophic for sure, is that it prevents the user from performing the task. For example, I cannot close the application, or I cannot remove my user from Netflix. That's something which prevents from task. And you may disagree, yes. The idea is if you are doing the debriefing of the scores with your coworker, try to understand why they see that as a minor problem versus you see that as a catastrophic. The important here are the discussions, not the score. This is all about finding issues and improving a UI, not about discussing if it's a 2 and a 3, which usually happens. But finally, the debriefing, the goal is to share all the findings together. One of the things we should do in the debriefing is to read what we found, try to use a jargon-less language, something that a client will understand. Maybe when we write the findings, we say, the menu hierarchy is not good, or something about the color palette. Try to use a language that the client will understand, because they will receive the report. If they see like menu hierarchy, they will likely think in, I don't know, trees or a technical thing, who knows. But that's a recommendation so far. And that's all to say, let's now do an exercise on reporting an issue. Let's say we have an issue. How can we report it? Tati, do you want to continue?
Yes, of course. So the intention for this exercise is we have a screen on the left. We don't want to pay you much attention to that screen in particular. What we wanted you all to pay attention is what we have on the right, on that blue box. We have a way of reporting findings over the screen on the left. So a couple of things in there are wrong. Can you guess what those things are? If you want to start just guessing around on the chat. It's too difficult. They are repetitive and not very clear. Yeah, you're right.
You're cutting for the right. Right. Okay, you got the.
Somebody else wanna guess? Aesthetics and minimalism design. The recommendation should be more specific, possibly providing an illustration. Should be in an Excel sheet. Okay. It's not quantifying the specific issues. Okay. All of you are going to the right direction. Somebody else wanna guess, or do you wanna jump into the answers?
I think we got very good answers. This is an excellent group of people today. Let's look at the responses.
Oh, not consistent with the selected role matching the analyzed box above. Okay, let's go with the first thing we identified. The name should have a void jargon, like hierarchy. That's not a word that everybody can be familiarized with. So we can replace that with menu, for example. And it's always better when we are identifying and speaking about findings to speak them in a positive way rather than a negative one. Instead of confusing, we use the word difficult for example. And that would be the first thing that we identify, the title. Changing confusing navigation hierarchy with difficulties navigating menu.
Well, the second thing, when you want to report, the heuristic might be optional. Like, what are you saying? Yes. One thing is when we work internally, that we want to use the heuristics as a way of evaluating to find problems to help us find. But when we want to talk with the client, we want to ship the report, maybe they are not familiar with the heuristics, unless our client are developers who are familiar, or yeah, but we tend to remove what is the evaluation.
As Maia mentioned before, severity can be really subjective. And that's why if we want to write down what's the severity of the issue we identify, we want to add an explanation saying why we believe it's either a 1, 2, or 3, or the scale that you are using. And that's why we recommend to, instead of saying important 1, just say why that's important for us.
Well, and as many mentioned in the chat, that's true. When we deal with the problem description, it has to be using simple language. For example, the menu that expands in levels offered challenges is better than the navigation has too many levels. What do you mean with too many levels? It's like the game with too many levels. So we have to be very precise about what we say. The same, there are a lot of useless items or confusing items. Confusing is like a buzzword. It's very easy to write confusing in a report, and it's very boring when you are a developer or something receiving the report to see confusing, like why? That's the first question we ask. So we have to be very, very careful on how we communicate this to the team.
And when we are talking about recommendations, we should be really explicit. What does simpler means? To a developer, it might mean something, but from our perspective, it could be completely different. So if we want the client to take actions on our recommendations, we need to be as explicit as possible. So that's why we changed the recommendations to what we have on the screen right now. And this is how the report should look like, with all the changes we made so far. And this would be the last exercise before we kind of jump into Miro. But first, Maia will be talking a little bit about what are the reporting takeaways.
So just this is like a wrap up before we jump into the exercise. When you are reporting, avoid jargon, avoid words like catastrophic, fire, horrible. Try always to use a positive and a constructive language. This will be read by a product manager or whoever. You don't want to use your application is horrible. The other important thing, make the case for each problem you report. Like, why should I care? We oftentimes see reports that go to the business and they say, oh no, this is not a problem, or I don't want to spend a week fixing this, who cares? So that's why when you write, try to make the case why this will create an impact. And for sure, the most important thing, be human. You are highlighting things that are not working fine. It's not you are correcting an exam of mathematics. You are helping others build something better. And that's the most difficult thing of the entire technique, trying to be empathic when you write the report. And that's all we have for today in the presentations, right? Let's move to the next. And again, thanks for staying with us.
So Mary, will you be pasting the Miro link on the chat?
Yes, I will put that in right now.
Awesome. Perfect, thank you. So what you all would see from the very beginning, once you open the link and you sign in into Miro, would be this screen. So on the right, we have a note with all the instructions that you all need to follow in order to execute this activity, this hands-on activity. We created a couple of groups called after superheroes, and you will know which team you are in once we go into the breakout room, because on the right of the breakout room in Zoom, it will have the name of the superhero you are in. So that will be your team. So once you are on your team, what you will need to do is identify the heuristics that are being represented in the examples. And we provided a hint, which is, we incorporated in the Miro board the new sense 10 heuristics, a cheat sheet, we like to call it. You will have an example of the 10 heuristics, or to identify them better, faster. What we want us to do with that information between your team is discuss why that heuristic is being either represented or violated in the example you are given. Write the findings on the boxes that are on the side of the example. And if you need, create new boxes. We put 4 boxes as an example. That doesn't mean that there are 4 things that you need to identify within the example. You will need to choose a team leader, and that team leader will be discussing the findings with you from your team later on. So how the example would look like, it would look something like this. You will have a screenshot of a website that Maya and I thought it would be a good example for this. And you will need to start saying, okay, this heuristic is being met, or maybe this other heuristic is being violated, and think about why you think that. And we want this activity to be conducted as a group. So first, take a few minutes to talk with your group, discuss a little bit, and then the team leader could start writing the findings. Do we have any questions about the exercise? It was clear enough, Maya. Maybe you wanna say something more?
No, I think it's okay.
Okay, perfect. Do we have any questions before we jump into the breakout rooms?
I don't see any in the chat, so I think we're good to go.
Be presenting from Team Superwoman.
So Sophia, Karen, Team Superwoman.
I can do it if, yeah.
Don't be shy.
For our first one, For our first one, we found heuristic 6. You can clearly see which sizes have been selected. I'm going to take our cheat sheet back over here. That way I can say what heuristic we're talking about. Yeah, we saw 6. And we also saw heuristic 8. No unnecessary info is on the screen. Users can opt in or out of more info with the plus sizes on the size and fit and product details. We saw here a lot of heuristics with the clear presentation of what sizes there are and the clear exit sign. So like 9, 3, and 5. Just use of a lot of information, but it's not presented in an overwhelming way with like a wall of text or anything. We also saw a match between system and real world heuristic 2 with the photo of the dress. And for our second one, we have United Booking. Taking a cheat sheet with me.
Do you want me to move it for you? Okay, there we go.
There we go.
It doesn't move, it stays wherever.
We have heuristic 2 with the match between system and real world. The calendar matches what you would see in real life on a calendar. We also saw heuristics 4 and 7 in the common input controls like the radio dials, the calendar tools, like every site that has a calendar has some sort of calendar that looks like that and has similar controls. We saw heuristic 8 and how the information is very clear. There's nothing excessive on the screen. You can change tabs instead of just having all of it in one big block. And we saw heuristic number 6, recognition that rather than recall, and just everything is very clearly presented. Yeah.
Awesome. And how this team find the exercise? It was easy. It was hard to identify them. It was easy to resonate with the heuristics, with the example.
It was interesting. It's like you can identify at least a couple heuristics pretty quickly and just the broad strokes, but once you try and really think about it for a long time and get into the details, there's a lot of overlap in them.
Mm-hmm.
I have like ones where there'll be 2, or earlier there was one that is 3 different heuristics for the same like 3 parts of the site.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you, Team Superwoman. Any questions for Team Superwoman before we move forward to Team Hermione? No questions. Okay. We have Team Hermione to present next.
Okay, hi, I'm Jessica. So we did the heuristic evaluation of joybaking.com. And as you can see, it's very, very busy. So our first finding was the aesthetics and minimalistic design. We thought there was some irrelevant information at the beginning of the recipe. It's talking about herself, so it's not really talking about the recipe itself. There's also quite a bit of, just kind of clutter on top and on the left-hand side. Our finding number 2 was positive. It was match between system and real world. So the recipes are in common terms, everyday terms. The way that she's describing herself is also in everyday terms. On the left-hand side, you can see that the green on our comments is positive and the red is kind of what we thought as a room for improvement area. Our finding number 3 was visibility of system status. So we noticed that Valentine's baking was highlighted red, but once you're there, you don't really know, is this all of Valentine's baking or are there other recipes? There's no way to know where you are in her book. And the next one is the user control and freedom. It restricts the user from going back or forward to any of the recipes or recipe list.
It's great how you all were able to identify heuristics that are okay, like are being represented on example, and some others that are being violated. So I believe the way you execute this exercise was great.
Thank you. And our last one, we ran out of time, so we found 3 findings, but we thought this page was very clean, so we tended to go more towards very positive heuristic evaluations. The first one was consistency and standard. So every segment is kind of in a card format. It's very standard across the web page. The second finding was the the recognition rather than recall. So you quickly draw your eyes to the green buttons. You know that that's where you're going to click. Everything where it's like sign up or buy now, it's green, and it has the same button forms that you can see throughout several different websites. And lastly, our third finding was the match between system and real world. There are a few icons. So if you look at the bottom 4 cards, there's a red book for school. There's like a computer with a desk work for work, there's a green icon, the couch icon for at home, and then there's like a yellow badge for academy. So we thought that was more like the match between system and real world.
This is perfect. You identify a lot with such a little short time. Congratulations, Team Hermione. And Elena wrote something on the chat that I think it's really worth mentioning. It's a great comment. She said that when we were talking on the first example where this team was able to identify many heuristics in just one part, that is great that you are able to do that, because it would be a key indicator that you need to fix something, like a quick fix, and it will improve a lot the experience of the application. Yeah, and we have our last team, Team Storm. Who will be presenting?
Hi, my name is Crystal. So we did heuristics for the NACO, and a couple things we noticed. Well, first, we thought the language was simple and it was easy to understand. We noticed a violation for consistency and standards. The logo and the cancel was a bit confusing, and we didn't realize that this was part of the logo. So possibly consider like making the logo a different font or maybe a border to help provide emphasis or kind of bring it pop. Another violation we noticed was the aesthetic and minimalist design for the second not milk. There was just a lot of busy work going on. Another one, a finding was match between system and the real world. We noticed for the second not milk, there was a scroll right in the middle, and that was kind of like oddly placed. And another one that we discovered was the consistency and standards. For the second one, the menu button is just not clear, hence why there's like an arrow on there. And we also did another one called bakingmad.com. And a couple things. For one heuristic, we said, well, we complimented that it was visually appealing and not too much busy work. A violation was consistency and standards. The filter top left and newest top right is confusing. So a recommendation would be to combine to one drop-down menu. Another violation was flexibility and efficiency of use. Combining the pagination and filtering together in one setting and option panel. And another finding is recognition rather than recall. Provides all the information you might want as a cook, like cooking time and skill, and rather than remembering the considerations by yourself. And that's it for us.
That is fantastic. I have to say you've done an excellent job by detecting the heuristics, finding the good parts, the bad parts. We intentionally did like all the exercises, but we are surprised at the quality of the answers. And thank you very much for being here, for participating. And before we jump to the end and we all go have dinner, any question, anything you have or you want to add?